Just before the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, dogs refused to go outdoors. Zoo animals ran to their enclosures. Monkeys at Sri Lanka's Yala National Park stopped accepting bananas from tourists, and elephants began to trumpet and ran for higher ground. Elephants can sense very low frequency sounds with their feet, and many animals are known for their seemingly innate ability to sense disaster even days before it arrives. But unfortunately, during the tsunami, a lot of animals did drown, so all animals must not have this ability. While humans don't have that particular ability, we're known to experience premonitions, or a strong feeling that something is about to happen. Like the previous example with animals, some humans will acknowledge the feeling, while others will ignore it or don't feel anything at all. When we have a disaster dream, you want to make sure that you're looking at it from two different angles. One is as a possible metaphor for something that's going on in your life, and two, as a premonition of something that may happen somewhere else in the world. On March 1st, 1950, around 7:30 in the evening, there was an explosion at Westside Baptist Church in Beatrice, Nebraska. The explosion happened during a scheduled choir practice, but fortunately, the church was empty. Each of the choir members were running late for various reasons. No one had a clue that something bad was going to happen, yet they all found some reason to be late. And at 4:30, the pastor turned on the heat to warm the church and he left. The church filled with gas and exploded at 7:27, 2 minutes after the practice was supposed to begin. On several occasions in 1979, a man named David Booth had nightmares about an American Airlines commercial jet crashing and catching on fire. He called the FAA and American Airlines, and he spoke with someone about the dreams that he had been having. They collected all of the information he gave them, and some sources say that the FAA took him seriously, but they couldn't take action based on a random caller's dreams. On May 25, 1979, at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, American Airlines Flight 191 crashed after only 31 seconds of flight when its left engine fell off. The details of the crash are said to match the descriptions that David Booth gave. All 271 people on board lost their lives, as well as 2 people on the ground. In October of 1966, in the mining town of Aberfan, Wales, 10-year-old Eryl Mai Jones told her mother that she had a dream that she had gone to school, but the school wasn't there. The school was gone. She said something black had come down all around it, and she told her mother that she wasn't afraid to die and that she would be with Peter and June, 2 of her friends from school. Her mother just shrugged off what her daughter was saying, but Eryl was adamant, and 2 days later, on Friday, October 21st, 1966, because of recent rains, 110,000 cubic meters of coal slurry, which is a mixture of coal waste, water, and shale, slid down the mountain and flooded part of the town. It smashed into Eryl's school and killed 144 people. 116 of them were children. They were either crushed or suffocated, and it was one of Britain's most horrific tragedies during peacetime. She was buried in a mass grave next to her classmates, Peter and June. More than 200 people from all over the British Isles claimed to have had some knowledge of it either through visions or dreams, and most of them had never even heard of the town before, didn't live near it, nor did they have any connection to it. And before the 2011 tsunami in Japan, another little girl had a premonition that her school was gone as well. Reeva Steenkamp was a 29-year-old South African model and paralegal who was dating Paralympian Oscar Pistorius. Both of his feet were amputated when he was 11 months old because of a birth defect. He was born missing the outside of both feet and both fibula. On February the 14th, 2011, while he was in bed, Oscar heard a noise in the bathroom that he claimed he thought was an intruder that was hiding in there. So he shot through the locked bathroom door 4 times. 3 of those bullets hit Reeva. She was the one in the bathroom. There was no intruder. He said that once he realized there wasn't actually an intruder in the bathroom and that Reeva wasn't in bed, he broke down the door with a cricket bat. What I want to know is, why would his first thought be that an intruder was in the bathroom instead of his girlfriend? That doesn't make any sense, and most people didn't believe him. He carried Reeva downstairs with her head and her arms dangling, and he placed her on the floor. and it was reported that she was still breathing and making a gurgling sound, so he gave her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. A doctor who had rushed over from his home nearby told Oscar that there were head wounds and that what he was doing wasn't going to help, and Reeva then stopped breathing. Oscar had a history of being controlling and abusing women, and a former girlfriend said that he used to lock her in his house with no food for hours at a time. He would call her parents many times a day to track her whereabouts, and he would physically abuse her, and he threatened her so much that she feared for her life. Oscar was found guilty of culpable homicide, but this ruling was overturned when he was found guilty of murder. He was initially sentenced to 6 years, but this caused so much outrage because it was too lenient. So in 2017, the Court of Appeal extended his term to 13 years and 5 months with the possibility of parole in 2023. A few months after Reeva passed away, her parents were in a documentary, and they talked about how Reeva and Oscar had been arguing weeks before she died, and they also showed a painting that Reeva had drawn when she was 14. It was a disturbing 2-part painting that showed an angel, a man with a gun next to a tree in a field, and a ladder going up to heaven. Her parents described the painting as a premonition of what was to come 15 years later. In the book, Dreams and Premonitions, there's a story that took place in 1979 about a young woman named Helen Tillotson who lived in an apartment building in Philadelphia. At 5 o'clock one morning, Helen heard a knock on her door that woke her up from a deep sleep. She heard her mother shouting if she was in there and let her in. When Helen opened the door, her mother, who lived across the street, asked Helen why she had been knocking at her door a few minutes earlier. Helen assured her mother that she had been in bed all night. And her mother said, "But I saw you. I spoke to you." She said Helen had told her to follow her home immediately without asking any questions. So she did just that. Suddenly, they both heard a loud noise. A gas leak in her mother's apartment building had caused an explosion, and her apartment was completely destroyed. If her mother had been there at the time, she probably wouldn't have survived. There were multiple premonitions about 9/11. A week before the attack, a woman in North Carolina had a dream about spinning into darkness, and she heard a man's voice repeating 2,830, 2,830, and a name that she couldn't make out. It sounded like Rooks or Harooks, she said. Because she was so frightened by the dream, she canceled tickets that her family had to fly to Disneyland on September 11th, even though her husband thought that she was overreacting. A week later, her family was thankful for her dream and for her canceling their trip. The number 2,830 was the confirmed number of deaths at the time, and the name Rooks or Harooks was Michael Harrock's, first officer of United Airlines Flight 175, which crashed into the South Tower. He was killed along with the captain by a hijacker in the cockpit. In an even more chilling example, an employee at the World Trade Center named Lawrence Bozo had a dream in September that the towers were crashing down around him. A few days later, his wife dreamt that the streets of Manhattan were littered with debris. The images weren't specific enough to stop him from going to work on that day, and he died that day, but not before he helped to rescue several children that were stuck in a daycare center on the ground floor. David McCourt's wife and his 4-year-old daughter were on United Flight 175. He said his wife talked about dying 6 weeks before September 11th. And he had also been struck by what he said was a physical premonition after he wished his wife and daughter a safe flight over the telephone. He said that he stood up to put the phone on the receiver, and this flash came into his head. It was so bright and so powerful that it knocked him down on the bed. And he told ABC News during an interview that he knew in his heart that it was a crash. Something that's really interesting about that day is that the occupancy rate of all 4 planes was very low, fortunately. Flight 77 had 53 passengers, 5 hijackers, and 6 crew members. American Airlines Flight 11 had 76 passengers, 5 hijackers, and 11 crew members. United Airlines 175 had 51 passengers, 5 hijackers, and 9 crew members. And Flight 93 had 33 passengers, 5 hijackers, and 7 crew members. On the morning of February 26, 1993, Barrett Naylor, a Wall Street executive, was on his way to work at the World Trade Center. It was a normal morning, but once he reached Grand Central Station, he had a sudden and unmistakable fear of foreboding that he couldn't describe. Something told him to turn around and go back home. So he did just that, and his quick decision probably saved his life because at 12:07 p.m. that day, a bomb exploded in the World Trade Center, taking the lives of 6 people and injuring over 1,000. 7 years later, on September 11th, he was once again getting ready for work at the World Trade Center when he got the same exact feeling. He again went home just like he did before, and he couldn't believe what happened next. He had escaped death twice. In 1967, 26-year-old Sharon Tate was staying at her then-boyfriend Jay Sebring's house at 9820 Easton Drive in Benedict Canyon in Los Angeles, California. Jay was in New York on business, and Sharon needed a place to stay until her apartment was ready. She was excited to stay there because she wanted to see the famous house that Jean Harlow and her husband Paul Byrne lived in. It was also where Jean had walked out on him and where he took his life. On her first night there, she had a dream or a vision that may have foreshadowed her murder. Supposedly, during a 1970 interview with Fate magazine published a year after she died, Sharon was asked if she'd ever had any psychic experiences. This was her response, according to the article. Yes, I've had a psychic experience, at least I guess that's what it was, and it was a terribly frightening and disturbing thing for me. It happened a year or so ago. Maybe you can explain it. She told him that first night she had a funny feeling, so she turned on the lamp on the nightstand. That's when she saw the figure of a little man enter the bedroom and that it dashed around the room and was bumping into things. She described it as almost solid rather than transparent. The figure looked like all the descriptions she had ever read of Paul Byrne. And it scared her so bad, obviously, that she jumped up and ran towards the stairs. But once she reached the staircase, things only got worse. She saw something or someone tied to the staircase. She said she couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, but that it was either her or Jay Sebring, and their throat was cut. So to calm her nerves, she made herself a drink and she pinched herself to make sure she was dreaming. She pinched herself and supposedly she didn't feel anything. So after a while, she went back upstairs, passing the apparition that was still tied to the staircase. Surprisingly, once she got back in bed, she immediately fell into a deep sleep, even though the apparition of the little man was still in the room with her. When Sharon died, she was only 1 mile from where she saw the apparition in 1967, and she was 2 weeks away from giving birth. The Fate article speculated that what she experienced wasn't just a dream, but a premonition that predicted her and Sebring's death. Sharon's family and friends denied that she ever had a premonition because she never told them about it, but the article did lead many to believe that the ghost of Paul Byrne was a warning of what was to come.